Thank you, Kai. Yeah, so I added a bunch of points that are all related to merge requests performance. And this was something that recently blew up. And it's something that we collectively at GitLab have been aware, but up until recently, no one had the full picture or as close as we can get to a full picture as we now do. And this has raised many concerns. And Sid is one of the people that is most concerned about this. And he raised this topic in yesterday's UX group conversation. And I posted his comments there. And he is expecting us to share plans and results in the CEO Slack channel and overall to involve him and make him aware of what we're doing. And he also proposed some things that he thought we could attempt to do. And I pasted them there: definition of large merge requests, testing those large merge requests, and bugs related to white space, and perhaps also having a score of the SUS survey that is specific to merge requests. And that's something that I'm looking into below in point 3. Then we can get to that. Yeah, this was initially an FYI point, and then I wanted to discuss this specifically with Michelle's suggestion for a shared KR below. But I see some comments there. Of course, yeah, we can talk about this. So I'm going to remove the FYI marker. Michelle, Andre, if any of you wants to voice your comments.
Michelle?
Mine is very self-explanatory.
You got to do the face.
I'll have to go back and watch that conversation, but we know, and honestly, it's a good thing that so many other people across the company are taking notice.
Yeah, I agree. We welcome this attention, and we are here for it. My question then was, I see a lot of complaints broadly about performance and slowness, and this is slow, and you want large MRs to be faster and everything. But when we go down to it, and especially important to setting a useful OKR is what metrics will we want to affect? Because there's the rendering of that MR that you want to make faster, which we've done extensive work on, but there's also the operating on an MR, like doing operations, comments, removal, resolving it, etc., which talks about a different kind of metrics. So the speed index, for example, will not track that improvement. We're talking more about memory usage, talk about more memory usage over the performing of several operations. Do we have memory leaks? That sort of stuff. So Kai, you have an answer?
Yeah, I would say they're related. It's all of it. And I tried to make this point in the group conversation yesterday that there are lots of things here, and we use large MR as an umbrella term for everything. And we sort of say large MR when it's lots of files, when there's lots of comments, when it is slow, like it's just like, oh, it's because it's a large MR, right? Like we sort of just generically use it as not optimal for a variety of reasons. And so I think it's all of those things. I'd also say it's irrelevant to sort of decide that now or maybe at all of what we're talking about, because we need to do both, and we need to figure out where we can get wins on both of these things. It does make it hard to like probably set a benchmark of where we're going to get if we're doing both of these things, because some might not impact that. But I think at this point, we don't get a chance to sort of decide that based on Sid's response yesterday. I don't think he cares how we feel about breaking this down.
Yeah, that's fair. Thanks. Pedro?
Yeah, I agree with Kai, but I think that distinction is important to make. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, we need to do both. If we had to pick one, if we really needed to pick one, I would say the loading rendering. But that is my personal view on it. I don't have any specific like quantitative data, only qualitative data from research that points more about the loading and rendering. Not a lot of people say that it's slow and commenting or browsing or doing an operation. And I think what we need to prove is not only for leadership, but externally, the best way to prove it is with actual, I mean, the experience of course needs to be better, but if we can say to Sid and to the community on Hacker News, every time something like this occurs, we can say, hey, this is the amount of time that you take to load something versus the same thing on GitHub. If we can say that, and we say that we're improving and we're almost there, or we've even surpassed GitHub, I think that's what everyone is looking for. Yeah. Michelle.
No. Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Michelle.
I'll write this in when I'm done talking. I did have this in mind. The performing operations part, I think, is is a huge complaint, and that's why I really added the for all elements part of my key result. But I see here that I also added total page load time, so that could be confusing. But the very first thing that I tested was I created a large MR. Again, that wasn't a successful test, but the very first thing that I did was I added a comment to one of the files, and doing that took like 2 or 3 seconds. And so I do think that the operations part comes hand in hand, but to Kai's point, I don't think we care to separate that. I think we're going to see that once we start working with this key result, if that makes sense. Or for example, jump to next thread, you know, that should be, in my mind, that counts as like 40% faster, because sometimes it just doesn't work at all.
Are you expecting an answer from me? I don't know.
Find the button. No, not really. I just kind of wanted
Okay.
to say that I don't think that we're gonna ignore, you know, I don't think we're gonna go through this key result and choose one or the other.
Okay. Yeah. I agree. I may mostly mention it because we can improve a bunch of metrics on the reports that users will not feel, and we've done that. We've seen that in the past. The one we're currently focusing a lot on is total blocking time, because it manifests itself on the user's perspective of the browser locking up. And going into my next point, when you mention what people expect, that we'd be able to compare it directly with GitHub and say that we're faster or just as fast, this is the time that I'll keep mentioning this. Given their significantly different approach to rendering MRs, it will be very hard or impossible to match their performance levels until we do significant disruptive improvements that will not be achievable in just a quarter. And I'm talking about the way we render diffs. I'm talking about how we get the data on the page. I'm talking about the technology that we use to render them on the page. Just to compare, like, it's 40 megabytes usage on their browser compared to a gigabyte on our page. And that's because we use significant different approaches to rendering the front end. So what I'm saying is that if that's the goal, then there's two things here. One is the iterative improvements we can do that will only get us so far, but they will not get us to the goal. If we want to get to the goal, and that's the goal, then we need to have another thread started as soon as possible to get to that goal. Is that clear? And just for the perspective of virtual scrolling in investigations that we've done, the lowest we've been able to get a memory usage that was around 500 megabytes was bring it down to, this is very preliminary with some bugs still, get it in the 170 megabytes, which is still way above what GitHub does. And just as a nugget of detail.
So
Okay.
Andre, just to clarify, you do not think we can have a 40% reduction without major changes?
Wait, 40% reduction of what metric?
Okay,
Right.
well, that's the question. I think we'll talk about
yeah.
that.
We'll definitely need to hash out the specific things we're targeting, 40% faster on what, because what I'm saying that we won't be achievable is to get the level of performance that GitHub has, a direct comparison. But the 40% sounds doable. We just have to specify specific which metric we want to target. Metrics, sorry, more than one, not just one.
I know everything says a quarter because we do OKRs and we take big things and make them an OKR when we want to make them people's priorities. And so it says a quarter. I don't get the impression, and I've never gotten the impression, that anyone is expecting us to solve this in a quarter. I don't think anyone thinks we'll come out of this 3 months later and go, we're as fast as GitHub. And like, okay, we did this. Let's move on to the next thing now. The purpose of making it an OKR is because, rightly or wrongly, I would say source code review has known that there are issues at a certain scale of MRs, and we sort of put some limits in place and other things, but we didn't actively try and like go and burn that down and make that a better experience. We sort of acknowledged some of it, masked some things, worked on improvements when we could. And I know great improvements have been made in some of the endpoint controllers, and some of improvements have been made in, largest contentful paint, and those are all good. But we were also still building features and adding other things to the product and doing other work. And I think what this OKR and sort of what the rest of the company is telling us is we don't necessarily get to do that for the next quarter. I think the purpose of making this an OKR is this is what we're doing for the next quarter and all we're thinking about as a group. And I think all of the engineers will only be thinking about this for a quarter. And then we can see where we are and figure out what we need to keep doing and what are the bigger pieces. But yeah, don't expect this to be a quarter and we're done. But think about it more that like people want us to really pay attention to this, and we haven't done. In others' eyes, we maybe haven't done as well as they would have liked us to. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I would say that
we accept it. Yeah, we accept the perception. I would only say one thing, and I take it that it's not just one quarter, but it's still important for us to decide whether we want to keep a full effort on iteration or we should have a percentage of it dedicated to a complete different direction.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Peter?
Yeah, I think that would be great to match or surpass, but I think there are other things that we can do to affect the user's perception of performance, and that they will still rave about our product, and that they can achieve their goals faster and with more satisfaction than GitHub. Like that's the ultimate goal, and not so much the timings, but the timings, of course, they tell a story as well. So for example, we have to make progress not only in the performance very heavily, pure product performance, but also we could do other things from the UX side, like for example, reducing their perception of waiting times, making sure like everything has loading states and that it doesn't look like the UI is frozen, for example. And also a very simple but very challenging thing to do is just reducing the amount of clicks and travel time with the cursor for people to do something and get their job done. So that's more important than just pure performance. And that's what people value more, but everything is related in the end.
Yeah, thanks. That that really works. What I'm talking is exactly, for example, whenever me and Thomas and Phil, we were talking a lot about, is Vue even the right tool for this job? So that's how deep this goes, right? We're talking about other ways of rendering templates on the page that is not depending on virtual DOM. So we're going deep on this particularly, but we haven't really started an effort, but that works. So yeah, thanks for that. Can we go to Marcel?
Sure. And my question is more, I've heard a lot of discussion now about all the metrics we track and all the different things we could track. Do we have them all in one single place where we could really see that? Or are some of these things not even tracked yet? What's the current state of this?
Yeah, I added a link there. I don't know if it's the most useful location for those metrics. Andre, Michelle?
I haven't seen this before. On first glance, I think this is awesome. My question would be, what is, for example, web group? What is web project? What is web project branches? Because later on in the agenda, you have linked to the 10K test bed. And so my concern with this data is if these are the simulated tests that the quality team runs for us, because we do run into problems with those sometimes in that they are not real world examples. And so I would say if we could make sure that these are really good tests and relate to real world examples, then this would be a good dashboard, if that makes sense. But I would want to know where this data is coming from.
Okay, I'm writing down some action items at the end. I think that's something that we need to figure out.
Yeah, the tests, from what I understand from Grant, is we have two major large AHMRs, and I'm with Kai, like it's a very big umbrella term that is unspecified. They have two large MRs, one for commits and one for discussions. And they run the tests on that 10K reference architecture. And I'm with Michelle, like they might not represent exactly a real world scenario, but they're good enough stab at it, but we should definitely improve it. My links go to the wider report. So what you're linked to is the dashboard of historical numbers, but we have a report that is run repeatedly, I'm not sure if daily, but regularly on this architecture that will provide us with deep insights. The reports give a lot of metrics. That's the second link, the artifacts results one. It will provide you with a lot of actual metrics that we're looking into on those reports. And for example, when we're doing a feature, we'll try to compare the numbers that we get after the feature is deployed and to see the impact that this has, like we've done with the TBT just recently. There's another level of metrics that we're measuring, which is the user timing APIs, the third link that I added there. There's a significant distinction between these two. The first set of metrics that we're talking about, they're global industry standard metrics, and they're generalized, if that makes sense, where any page on the web will have those metrics taken out of. The one that we have on the user timing API, they're specified by us. We were able to specify specific moments on our application to detect when the first file gets rendered, when the file tree gets rendered, when the last file gets rendered. And that gives us a better perception about what's happening with the app. Was it the page took longer to load, but why? Was it the file tree took longer to load? Was the files took longer to render? It gives us a more detailed, fine-grained approach. Marcel, that's kind of like the metrics we're looking into regularly. If it helps to have it a more summarized version, maybe we can do an update on the handbook of our team page to see which metrics we're looking into.
Yeah, I think communication. Absolutely. And I think communication around which metrics you're looking at and which ones you want to look at for improving the performance is going to play a big role in this OKR, because not only do we need to improve the performance, we also need to show that to everyone and need to make it visual so that we could also have some other teams understand the effort and maybe even support us here. So I think really making this easy to overview for people who are not used to this overview, that could be really helpful.
Okay, thanks. That helps. That's something for us to keep in mind and potentially resurface in better ways. Any more thoughts?
Okay. Okay, do we want to talk about any action steps here, or do we want to jump to the next point that talks about the specific key result?
Let's keep going.
Well,
We're
next.
bumping up on time.
Okay, so Michelle made this suggestion to improve the performance of large MRs by 40% as measured by the total page load time for all elements. And FYI, this is likely to become a product key result for Q2. And again, aligned with what also Sid is prioritizing. Yeah, the point B under there is related to what we were just talking about, like, can we reuse this data from the performance site speed? Already added an action item to talk about that. So I don't think we need to talk about it. One thing in specific that I wanted to bring up is, would it be, well, not possible because anything is possible, but would it be useful at this point in time in the short term to have something similar to ForgePerf where we can compare with competitors? Or is that something that we don't need to think about right now? It would be useful for me, but I don't want to put extra pressure.
Back on
I'd say
the
it's
last point, we have all of these dashboards, and so maybe what would be easiest is something like this, but I have no opinion. It's whatever's easiest, more readable.
Yeah, I don't have an opinion other than as long as it doesn't take capacity from the team solving the problems, I'm fine. So I think this touches on Marcel's point of revealing the numbers in a consumable way. I just would rather us not focusing on that particular with the engineers we have. Yeah, that's kind of like my only thought. It will remove capacity from the fixing.
Sure. Yeah, I think, but would it be helpful as a way to perhaps understand how competitors are doing it? And I mean, certain things so that we could learn from them?
So if we go into the disruptive approach, part of that effort will be a exploratory phase. And in that, we'll do the benchmarking of others. I think that this question in this example falls more on a PR, marketing, communication, high-level communication part of things, not necessarily beneficial for engineering. That we'll do on our own when we're doing the exploration, I think. But I don't want to stop it. I just think that it falls more on a communication part of the effort, which is important. I don't want to downplay that.
Yeah, I think it would be distracting to have it now. It gives, it'll create a comparison and potentially detract from any improvements we make if we're still not there, right? If we end up and we got 40% better and we're still not GitHub fast, people are going to go, well, you're still not GitHub fast. And we're going to get, and so like 40% worth of improvement is going to look like nobody cares or nobody appreciates that sort of, I think, in that way. So I don't think it would be helpful to make a comparison today. I think what we need to do is, and I put it down in the actions, we need to find the reference large MR that we're going to use, set up the dashboard for that with the metrics we're going to track, and that's the one that we have. And eventually we can take that reference large MR and put it on github.com or put it on other places and then like see where we're at. But I think right now we should be in a looking inward phase, not a looking outward phase.
I like the way you put it.
All right. Yeah, sounds good to me. Yeah, I added a point there. I don't know if it's useful at this point in the conversation, about the quality team helping in with this, but I think that's already part of assessing the current performance test suite. I don't know if anyone has any other information that would be helpful for the people here in the call.
My point here is basically just what I said earlier. You see these results in the form of our performance refinement issues that we burn down every month. And those issues are important, and that is why we work them. But sometimes those issues have been deprioritized because they're just simply not an example of what happens on GitLab.com. And so, yeah, I don't know if those tests are accurate to say like this is how users perceive performance. So I think the action item here is really just like what Kai said. What's the reference we're going to use, and let's make a dashboard for that.
Okay. For creating the reference MR, who wants to do that? We probably need to do that sooner rather than later. Is there? I know we've got the one that I have that's terrible because it's 1,500 single line changes, which is not useful either. Is that like, does backend want to build out a script that we can use to sort of easily do that everywhere, or how should we get one?
Do we need a script to do that? My impression was like, let's use yours and add more stuff to it.
My expectation is people will need it locally. People will need it in staging. People will need it in production. People will need it in multiple local environments, right? Like every engineer is probably going to need a copy of this MR.
Let's see if maybe quality can help us. And if not, let's do a script.
Okay. Can I say something? We've had this question in conversations before over time. And I know that at least since 2018, we've been tracking one particular example of an MR that is considered large, and it's a real world example. It has 96 commits, and we've been tracking it in our performance dashboards since then. It's a GPG change that we did back then. I'm trying to put it in the agenda as soon as I find it. Since we already have historical data on that, instead of going and reinvent the wheel, could we just reuse that one instead? Try to find where we are in the agenda.
Yeah, we're up at time, and we should probably figure out if we can use it. The other piece is we need to define large MR, and then that will probably tell us if whether or not that one meets the benchmark. And I asked down below in the action items in like a Google comment, but
okay.
We need to know, because, and this is again where large MR is the terrible catch-all term. Is it X commits? Is a large MR actually one that's like bumping up against our diff limits? Because we know we have customers that hit our diff limits with their large MRs, and then the rest of the MR suffers. But like, is it something that's under our diff limits collectively that we want to approach? And so I think we need to define that, and then get an MR that pushes us sort of right to the envelope of that.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Who would lead that? Is that UX or is that engineering or both? Should we have a spike and we work on it together? Or just wing it together? We do a call and do it together. Honestly, this needs to get done as soon as possible. So
yeah, let's do it. I'm happy to help in any way I can. I think I would only be able to help it up to a certain point. After that, my technical literacy starts to
we're happy to help
apart. But
that's what we're trying to figure out. Idea right to take this forward so that it can pull everyone together.
Yeah, I can help you with this definition, but I don't have the skills to create the scaffolding and the ways to test this. So we need someone from the technical side.
We need the decision. I think the decision of what is an MR. The implementation of it, we'll take care of it later. But we need one person to drive this forward, get everyone together on a call or whatever.
Okay, cool. I can do that.
Thanks, Peter. We appreciate it. And the rest of time, we'll move the points and the rest of the agenda to the next time, I guess. Sounds good?
Sounds good to me.
Thanks all. Very productive.
Thanks.